Hi there, hello, this is me, it's Moscow here, and this is Leedsista Libre, the free podcast in which I bring a recording of something that I wrote in olden times, as was recorded in olden times, and bring it to you now. In this time, ahead of playing Aston Villa on Sunday, we're going back to 2019 for when we played Aston Villa at Elland Road, and all kinds of fun broke out in this match. Thank you, Mateusz Klich. I know everybody thinks that Gianni Infantino's Peace Prize is probably going to Donald Trump. I have a slight feeling it might be going to Mateusz Klich instead. Leeds were declared the world's fairest team after this match, something I don't think John Terry ever agreed with, although I don't know why we ever cared what John Terry thinks in the first place. If you care what I think, Leedsista.com for more things about what I think or things I've discovered recently. On there, I've written about the history of the Old Peacock pub, answering a few questions. Why is Elland Road where Elland Road is? Why was the pub over the road called the Peacock? Why was the whole area called Islington? And in some maps it still is. Why was there then a new Peacock, which meant that the Peacock had to become the Old Peacock? All those questions that I'm sure have occupied your mind as you make your way down to Elland Road for a game, answered, I think, in a couple of fairly long articles at Leedsista.com. Also at Leedsista.com, the recent report on when we beat West Ham, which shows the consistency of football because Stuart Atwell refereed that game and annoyed me almost as much as he annoyed me in the game against Aston Villa in 2019, which you're about to hear plenty of now, and I hope you enjoy.
Leeds United 1, Aston Villa. Aston Villa 1. That's right. Leeds United's last home game against Wigan Athletic started amid bright sunshine and relaxed optimism like a pre-season friendly, then collapsed in on itself like a white dwarf star, or like a metaphor for the history of Leeds City and United, 1904 to 2019. Leeds United versus Aston Villa felt like another pre-season friendly, but without the optimism. United's defeat at Brentford had ruined the mood, and Sheffield United's win over Ipswich Town had flattened it, so this match felt like a pause before a new, hopefully 3-game season starts in the playoffs. The main point of interest was the chance to see a new youth player, 17-year-old playmaker Mateusz Bogus, on the bench, and underlining the lack of seriousness, the squad lined up before the match with their babies in their arms. There were a lot of these, suggesting another source of burnout apart from Marcelo Bielsa's punishing training regime. Perhaps the academy should put on family planning sessions for Bogus and his teammates to ensure our future first-team players are getting good night's sleep. Alone, Gaetano Berardi swerved the gaggle of spouses and kids by the players' tunnel, marching past them all and sitting straight down on the bench, ready for football. The game was falling as flat as the preparation suggested it might. At first, Leeds couldn't get out of their own half as Aston Villa looked as good as their reputation and their 10 consecutive wins. After an early onslaught, Leeds started asserting their style, as Bielsa puts it. He was using Mateusz Klich as a more physical enganche than Tyler Roberts, with Adam Forshaw muscling the midfield behind him. Calvin Phillips was back to doing his usual defensive midfield job, but with additional responsibility for marking Jack Grealish. This was made difficult by Grealish's habit of throwing himself to the floor whenever he heard the whip of Phillips' braids through the air near him, and rather than using a heat map, Grealish's performances should have been measured with a baby monitor. He spent much of the game sitting on the floor, his arms stretched out, begging the referee to put a dummy in his mouth. He was no risk to Leeds, never getting into their box and never creating anything, a testament to Phillips' work, as was Phillips getting through the game without a booking. The referee, Stuart Atwell, might notice that absence as he leafs through his notebook and feel a tinge of regret. Atwell became the Premier League's youngest referee in 2008, and it took until 2012 for the mistake to be realised, when he was demoted to continue his search for the attention his parents never gave him in the Football League. It was Atwell's whistle that pandered to Grealish's every fake cry, as if he was hoping that the most popular kid might notice him and play with him after school. He had judged that Leeds made twice as many fouls as Aston Villa in the first half, despite Leeds having the ball for 67% of the time. Near me on the press gantry, Norman Hunter yelled, "Is this the good guys versus the bad guys?" And on the touchline, Marcelo Bielsa was saying something similar to the fourth official. They crouched together on the touchline, locked in debates that led to Atwell coming across with a yellow card for Bielsa and a bulge in his shorts. Bielsa, who has been a studied contrast to the rest of this country's coaches by refusing to publicly criticise any referee this season, took a moment before half-time to apologise to the fourth official, placing a hand on his shoulder and accepting that he had lost his temper. Then, as Leeds passed the ball dangerously into Aston Villa's penalty area, Atwell decided to blow his whistle for half-time, and Bielsa blew his lid again, along with all the Leeds players and all the crowd. Atwell waited on the pitch before being guarded down the tunnel, purple with delight in the atmosphere he'd created, like a scab filling with poisonous blood. If the game had been refereed properly, the incident it will be remembered for would never have happened. As it was, rather than being the centre of attention, Atwell was only a bystander to the goal that Leeds scored and the goal they gave away, and that was in fact the problem. His hypersensitive refereeing, rather than imposing discipline, rendered the pitch almost lawless, the players going about their business as best they could, unable to predict how or why Atwell would blow against them. A referee is supposed to keep a match calm, with consistency and good sense. The way Atwell ended the first half proved that he was out to provoke. If he wanted problems, Mateusz Klich gave him one. The referee can decide to stop a game if a player looks seriously injured, or players can kick the ball out if they're concerned about a colleague, or everybody can play on until the next break in play, usually coming soon enough for the physio sponge to soothe the bruise away. When Adam Forshaw was felled on the edge of Leeds United's box, Atwell didn't give a free kick, and Villa, once their attack had fizzled out, put the ball out of play. When Jonathan Kodjia hurt himself by barrelling through a tackle on Liam Cooper in the centre circle, United's attack hadn't fizzled out, but was just getting going, and Tyler Roberts, seeing the Villa players asking for the game to stop, paused as if unsure and opted to kick the ball towards Klich and let his more experienced teammates sort it out. Klich, not hearing a whistle, not seeing any reason why the game should stop, opted to put the ball in Aston Villa's net and let Stuart Atwell sort it out. That the goal stood says everything. It was perfectly legal. After the game, Bielsa refused to acknowledge any difference between sporting behaviour in general and the behaviour in this game's specific circumstances, but that's because he's a more moral person than I am. I felt the ball hitting the net with the power of every single one of Jack Grealish's falsely earned free kicks. Under more peaceable circumstances, Klich might well have tapped the ball out of play and taken the fair play applause rather than the goal. But the game was being played at a high pitch of Atwellist injustice, so into the net it went. And down Pat Bamford went. I've no track record with Bamford to check whether faking a punch to the face and falling to the floor would be his usual response in the melee after Klich scored, but I suspect he was thinking that what had been good enough for Grealish in the previous 70 minutes was good enough for him. Then again, Bamford had been particularly witless 10 minutes earlier, chasing Axel Tuanzebe into the centre circle and pushing him under Atwell's nose, the one thing every other Leeds player was trying to avoid doing. Pat complained alone. Perhaps cunning isn't in Bamford's nature either. Atwell, sorting out the chaos after Klich scored, booked Bamford and sent off Anwar El Ghazi, the player who offended him, but if the cards were both given for their parts in that incident, they seemed contradictory. El Ghazi sent off for something Bamford was booked for faking. We'll have to wait for the referee's report to find out what they were actually punished for, once Atwell has had his milk and sharpened his crayons. Marcelo Bielsa and Dean Smith weren't waiting for Atwell to decide anything. Even while fights were breaking out across the pitch, smoke bombs going off in the stands, players lying injured on the floor, the crowd roaring at it all. Don't listen to anyone who says we don't like to see this in football, because it was all fantastic. The head coaches held a summit to sort the situation out. Smith says he asked Bielsa to let Villa equalise. Bielsa, his hand on Smith's shoulder, Carlos Corberán urgently translating, agreed immediately. Bielsa's bigger problem was convincing his players. Pontus Jansson in particular shouted his anger so strongly at the bench that the rest of the players began to wonder who, Bielsa or Jansson, they should be listening to. Bielsa was emphatic, and Jansson, trying to kick Albert Adoma's knees off as he walked through to score, was seeing his red mist. Gaetano Berardi was the peacemaker, as he had been in the fighting after Klich's goal. Given the way that John Terry kept carrying on the argument between the benches even after Villa had been allowed to score, it was fortunate Berardi wasn't still in the volatile technical areas, or I don't think he would have stayed calm enough to avoid settling some of Wayne Bridges' old scores. Bielsa gave an ironic answer to an Argentinian journalist pressing the subject of Jansson after the game. "I'm not surprised that it's an Argentinian journalist that asks this kind of question," he said. Then he gave his serious answer. Not everyone accepts destiny in the same way, especially when you have to give up something that is so hard to reach. Jansson said much the same after the match. He worked so hard for a clean sheet, it was hard to give it up in that manner. Jansson is a hothead, Bielsa is El Loco. I doubt that's the first argument they've had this season, and I suspect they secretly relish each other's passionate obstinance. Bielsa's other characteristic obstinance is his refusal to be drawn into football's outrage machine. What happened, happened, he said, and we behaved as we behaved, and that's all I can say about something that is very clear. There was nothing more to discuss about an incident that everybody saw. Even Dean Smith went home content with how Leeds had behaved. Full respect to Marcelo and Leeds United for giving the goal away, he said, because it was the right decision. Perhaps he was remembering guiltily the point he took away from Elland Road with Brentford earlier in the season, won from Ollie Watkins' dive. Mateusz Klich quietly accepted his part in the proceedings too, apologising to Smith after the game, and if there was a fault in the way Leeds scored, it was the moment when Roberts gave the ball to Klich. It was interpreted by everyone on the pitch as a pass going out of play until Klich flipped the script. That momentary stutter is the one thing Villa could complain about, but complaining about it by turning from diving whiners into fighters wasn't the noble response that Bielsa praised English football for after the game. Perhaps if there'd been a referee on the field worth listening to, the behaviour of the players, of both teams, would have been different. The whole affair breathed life into the match for 5 minutes, then took it out again, and the final phase went by like a training exercise for Leeds, attack against defence. They surrounded Aston Villa's penalty area, filled it with players, returned the ball again and again, and still persisted with extra passes when a shot could have made the difference. The drama, and Bamford's dive, disguised another impotent performance from him where it counts. The guaranteed moment of collapse for a Leeds attack was Bamford getting the ball. Leeds pushed and pushed in the last 20 minutes, 84% possession, 10 misdirected shots. But only having Klich's goal to show for the day proved that while Leeds can match Aston Villa, they need to find their early season impetus again to score past them at Wembley. If Wembley is where this is all heading. The playoffs were on everybody's mind as the kids were brought out before the match, and then again at full time for the players' lap of honour, and while nothing can be guaranteed in the post-season games, it was hard to avoid the idea that Stuart Atwell had been sent specifically to provoke the grudges and petty rivalries that could make a Wembley meeting between these two teams in the richest game in football, trademark, a malevolent classic. If Leeds beat Frank Lampard Jr.'s Derby County on the way to a rematch with John Terry's Aston Villa, the hype won't only encompass this weekend's controversy, but Marcelo Bielsa's philosophy being tested by a self-righteous aristocracy representing English football's inflated sense of worth. We already know that Sean Harvey has, in his wisdom, decided that video assistance won't be available to the referee in the final, a decision that, combined with this game, makes one wonder how inadequates like Harvey and Atwell manage to fill positions of authority in English football, and always have, stretching back to the eminences at the FA, who hated Don Revie so much they hired him, and then hated him even more. Whatever happens between now and whenever Leeds United's season ends, we can at least be sure of how Leeds will behave. Fighting for and seizing every advantage on the pitch, refusing to be part of any controversy off it, dominant in midfield but deficient in front of goal, with no fit left-backs. We'll be hated, but we'll be right.